Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy EV miniseries. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me is co-host Niall Riddell. Neil, what's going on today?
Hey Chris, welcome to a rainy England. It's a bit damp over here, but we are enjoying the weather still.
Besides rain in England, which is not shocking, what are we going to talk about on today's podcast?
So we're going to dive into the world of vehicle to grid. It's one of my pet favorite topics. We talk about how the energy in an electric vehicle battery can move in two directions. And we're very lucky to have a true UK expert, a pioneer of vehicle to grid with us today. Claire, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi guys, my name's Claire Miller. I was the Director of Tech and Innovation at Octopus Electric Vehicles for 4 years, from 2019 to 2022, and now I'm sort of what can I say, advisor at large, so working with startups and larger companies alike to help move the needle on decarbonisation and electrification.
Very cool. Now, you have some true real world experience of some pretty significant vehicle to grid projects here in the UK. What led you into that? What was that project? And, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I count myself very lucky that as a part of kind of doing this work, I have had vehicle to grid at my home for over 3 years now. So I've lived with the system, the highs, the lows. I've done that classic kind of left my car empty and not charged it up overnight because something didn't work in the system, and I have a real kind of true user experience. But yeah, the reason I got into it was I was asked by Fiona Howarth, who is the CEO of Octopus Electric Vehicles, who some of your listeners, I'm sure, will have heard of, um, that Octopus had won a bid from the UK government for a consortia project, and it was going to be called Powerloop, and it was about domestic vehicle to grid. It was, how do customers experience this? What are all the bits of the system you need, all the permissions, everything technical, from all the stuff that a customer sees all the way back to sort of the data platform and the control and integration with the energy markets. And they needed a hand to kind of work out all of that stuff. And knowing Fiona for a long time, she said it sounded like a real sort of Claire project, and was I interested? And so that was it. I was sort of drawn in from the very first conversation. This amazing concept, really futuristic, and that opened up Powerloop, and it opened up the other part of my work there around EV leasing as well. So yeah, that was the start of it.
And to be clear, we're talking about normal people, normal householders with electric vehicles, driveways, and a particular kind of charger, a particular kind of car. What did you need to be part of this trial?
Yeah, it's a really good one. So for folks who are completely new to this, I'm going to put like a first health warning that this was a trial based on the tech that we had available. It was about proving the experience, about learning about the market forces, learning about the permissions. It wasn't about proving that this particular vehicle, this particular charger was like the only answer. So I'm going to say that, and Neil, you know why, because this comes up a lot in the world of V2G. So we used Nissan Leaf, which has Chademo as its charging protocol, and we used a bidirectional DC charger for this trial, and the one we used was from Wallbox. There was another one used in other trials at the time from a company called Indra, and there are now a sort of slowly growing number of DC bidirectional chargers coming. Also, anyone that sort of knows about EVs at all will be thinking, well, Chademo, hang on, hasn't Chademo gone out of fashion, and aren't we going towards CCS, CCS2 in UK and Europe? And yes, this is about what was available at the time to prove what it was like and to develop a customer experience and test that all out. And that was what was available. So that's what we used. And actually, the irony of Chademo going out of fashion is it's an incredibly solid, stable kind of comms protocol, and it has a really sturdy physical connector as well. So yeah, I mean, anyone that knows us will know, like me and Neil are probably like very pro Chademo, and so this is slightly heartbreaking for us, but it was what we needed to prove out all these pieces of the system for basically getting energy out of that car back into the home and back onto the grid, and learning about what would make customers do that, what would make them interested in that, what would they feel rewarded them, would they remember to plug in. These were all the kind of questions we were asking, wanted to ask, but to get to those questions, we had to build out all those pieces of the system first.
And just to complete our understanding of the story, when exactly was this that you were first? Well, I guess when did you win the project, and when did you start putting customers into the trial?
Oh, that's such a killer question. So the competition itself was through 2017 into 2018. So it's quite a long time ago now. The early kind of concept work, development work was in sort of 2019 into 2020. And really on reflection, it was a super ambitious project from Innovate UK and like a call for this, from what was then Bayes, now DESNES, because actually a lot of those pieces of the system were not there and were not available. So one of the key issues we had on this project and other projects like it was having those chargers available and having that kind of comms sort of digital world built didn't exist. We then were stuck for a year with COVID. We couldn't install things, we couldn't deliver cars, and so eventually we had that everybody's deadline moved out a year. So actually, we were finishing up sort of March time last year, and in fact, Powerloop sort of carried on into June, July time because we got an extension to complete the integration with the UK's national grid balancing mechanism. So that's something we maybe come on to if that's of interest to the listeners from an energy perspective. And that was a really crucial piece of work to prove that we could send a signal from the grid to vehicles to export for the first time. Now we weren't settled, so that's really important. That's a bit of a nuance there. It's important to folk. We proved that we could bid in and then receive that signal back through something called the Wider Access API, the WAPI. Octopus have subsequently gone on to actually complete that integration and test with National Grid and actually have cars charging through the balancing mechanism. I guess the next step will be when there's then a settled export period. So that's what Powerloop was all about.
So it sounds like an
So
amazing project. It seemed a bit early. Now I remember having other guests on. We spoke about a project in the Northwest in the U.S. where they basically had 2 EVs. I guess when you're doing this kind of testing, are you doing it with 1 EV or
Yeah,
are you
we had
doing it with a small fleet? I didn't hear your answer. I'm sorry.
we oh no, we had 135 customers on the trial, and actually part of the trial design was could we encourage or could we interest folk in actually taking part in V2G, and could we interest them in taking a lease on a vehicle, and could we interest them in it? So we had about 2,000 people actually contacted, all told, but 135 of them ended up taking part. And actually, in terms of proving integrations, like one's enough when you're doing, point-to-point integrations. But actually, when you want to understand and learn and observe how does a group of people work, then yeah, it was a good number. The next stage of this is actually there are folks now smart charging their vehicles and being smart charged, and we're learning about that. So yeah, it was a really good number for us. It was a challenge to get to that number, to be honest, for lots of reasons, but it was all good learning.
And during the period that you were doing this, you were saying it was post-COVID, was energy prices high enough to really excite people? I think one of the drivers are energy pricing. So, if energy prices are up, people are super excited about this. Was that helping your cause at the time?
Was energy perspective, were exploring like what might like smart tariffs look like. So we didn't have a tariff at that stage that had been designed for vehicle to grid, and so our first step into the project was actually a kind of more of a reward base. So it was, if you do a certain number of sessions a month, we will give you a certain reward. And we wanted to understand, like, was that enough? Was that interesting? Would people remember to plug in? Through the project, we looked at tariff design, and we actually then transitioned to a tariff which was an import and an export tariff, so kind of a dual setup, and that flushed out all kinds of interesting stuff around, folks who have the feed-in tariff in the UK. There was a challenge around potential double dipping, and that kind of counted them out of the tariff because they can't have an export MPAN. So there's lots of like edge cases it flushed out, but yeah, in effect, we kind of trialed, I guess, like the flex platform provider angle, which is here's a reward for what you're doing, and then we moved to a kind of maybe energy retailer angle, which is here's a set of tariffs which bakes in the whole reward. And actually, to your point about about costs and things, yeah, that is I guess always a work in progress, and you kind of have to set that based on where the market's at. But ultimately, the import tariff ended up being Intelligent Octopus, which folks can have a look at now, which is the smart flex backed 6 hours of cheap energy overnight, and at any time when the battery is flexed. And the import became just a really simple dual band tariff, which is you get paid more at tea time. So you get paid more in the evening, 4 to 7, and you get back the same as that cheap import at any other time. So you're always kind of netting out, but for those periods of time when you're called upon to import or export, you're accessing the best rates. That's how we ended up getting to, and we got incredibly good compliance. People were very positive about it, and I think the main thing was about building up trust and about folks actually trusting that whilst we were taking the battery down to sort of 30%, we were going to charge it back up again. Once they got that trust, everything else sort of flowed.
And within this, you've tested a tariff, and that tariff has had particular prices, and you then assumed you're going to get some consumer behavior. Are you able to give us an idea as to the magic number? At what point do these, and they're going to be quite engaged because they are trial participants and they've chosen to be part of this. At what point do consumers start to, switch on? Is it £100 a year, £200 a year, £300 a year? And can we make that money?
Yeah, I mean, still a work in progress, I think is the fair thing to say. That's the politician's answer. But with this trial, we ended up with quite a lot of early adopters. And so early adopters are always keen and will always engage. And whilst they're really important, the people who will put up with all the bumpy experiences and the kind of the difficult times, we're not designing products. We mustn't design products just for those folk. We need to do that for the mass market as well. So I guess that the brutal truth is that we don't really know yet because we haven't reached the mass market. But certainly, once folk trust that the car will be discharged and charged overnight, then plugging in compliance is a non-issue because plugging in is easy. And so if it's all done automatically, it's a no-brainer. So that from a behavior perspective was great to see. And then in terms of the reward, I think that's the other open question is actually once customers are engaged in the concept that it might be beneficial for them and they're convinced that it won't be extra cost for them and it unlocks some cheaper tariffs import, maybe unlocks some payment export, maybe unlocks some kind of reward, then you're kind of at the mercy of the market. And then the devil is in the detail of how you are able to participate in flex and how you share those profits back. So how you share that revenue between not just you, maybe an energy company, flex provider, charge point manufacturer, OEM, but don't forget the customer as well. So I guess it's really hard to say right now, and I am engaged in like conversations daily with multiple of these different actors in this system to understand like who owns the customer, how do you make sure the customer gets their fair reward, and who else is part of that revenue stack and revenue share.
Now, are the folks that you're working with, are they mostly in single family dwellings then that they have the full benefit of having the charger and battery for their own use? Or does this extend out to someone at this stage, even to a multifamily?
So the design of this trial was specifically around being able to have a driveway so we could install the charger to also test would customers take a lease on a vehicle, to also test how it would work with a single smart meter. So one import MPAN, one export MPAN. So the design of this power loop trial was specifically around that. And actually, I'm not aware of any trials going on right now in the UK around like multi-dwelling units. And actually, I think understanding the different building blocks of the system is what this gave us. But yeah, I think it's an interesting observation and it's an important reflection, which is we really need these vehicles to come to market, and we really need sort of ranges of chargers to start actually exploring different use cases. When I look across to what's going on in Utrecht as an example of somewhere where there's something a bit more what can I say, kind of multi-dimensional going on, they have banks of bidirectional chargers with cars that are like car sharing in all parked together. You also have on-street bidirectional chargers for folks to park up cars and leave them there. And so I think we are still a way away from that in the UK, from seeing like the first kind of scale kind of block of flats or the first scale like V2G car park. But a lot of that is not about the willingness of, I don't know, like the building owners or the car park owners. It's more about that technology coming to market at scale so that it can be deployed in different use cases.
And that leads us to this incredible question around, to make this system work, and there's quite a few moving pieces. You need the energy system to adapt, and I
Mm,
think they're starting to realize that you can bring small aggregated assets together. You
mm,
need the charger to be available,
mm,
and I think you said that's available. But let's talk about the vehicles.
mm.
What's the list today look like of V2G capable vehicles? Is it any longer than one hand? We maybe made it onto two hands yet, or are we still Nissan Leaf, Nissan Leaf, Nissan Leaf?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess that's the absolute um, kind of foundation to all of this is it's V2G, and so the V is absolutely critical. Um, so yeah, so we mentioned earlier we're moving across from Chademo to CCS, um, and actually in North America, NACS and ACS has kind of come along the rails and is now kind of pretty much, well, it's not quite ubiquitous, but anyone that's watching who's adopting that standard is seeing it. The big ones have gone, so everyone will probably go. But actually, those are about you know those are about the physical connector and about the arrangement of cables going in and out to those connectors. There's also like communication standard behind that, which has been in development for a long time, is coming, and that's ISO 15118-20. And then there's another com standard between like certainly domestic workplace chargers, which is OCPP, currently 2.0.1, but let's see as that gets up revved. So lots of pieces of the puzzle that are not visible to customers. So in bring it back to the OEMs, I would say, like from my experience and my knowledge, there are many manufacturers who have this working. There are some who are actively talking about bringing it. I am still holding my breath. I think we all are for which one will bring it to market first in the UK as a V2G product. So the reason I think it's going slowly is a lack of confidence in the business model. The technology absolutely works. The standard is there or thereabouts. Um, that there's a clarity around that side of things. Certainly from the DC perspective, maybe we'll talk about AC and DC systems in a sec when we talk about the vehicle. But actually, clarity around what role will the OEM play in this energy market when we're talking about it as a battery on wheels rather than as a mobility asset, I don't think is clear at all. And I think that, as I mentioned, there are multiple actors in this ecosystem, all of whom feel like they should have some part and some share in the revenues that are potentially realized through discharging and charging the battery to the grid ultimately. And I don't think the OEMs really have confidence and a clear pathway to how will they get their piece. And if we take a step back and think about, only 5-10 years ago, vehicle manufacturer made vehicles. They maybe had a place in the aftermarket servicing, maintenance, repair, and in trying to woo customers back after their maybe their lease to get another vehicle with them or to buy another vehicle in future. Now suddenly they have a world of connected vehicles, services, energy services. It's in all directions. There's a lot of new for vehicle manufacturers. Not to mention the fact, obviously, that they're going electric. So I don't really, honestly know how high up right now in their priority kind of making V2G work is. And I guess, we as energy stroke industry folk can help by showing the pathway to this working, by showing customers are interested, and by helping to sort of flash out what those services and rewards can look like. But for me, that's the absolute hot topic at the moment is how to get the vehicles, unlocked on the road and participating.
So you gave me a great political answer on the cost. Let's talk about the revenue. Is there enough revenue in here that everyone can have a slice of the pie? Can the auto OEM get something? Do they need something to, guarantee warranties on the battery? How much does the consumer need? How much does the energy supplier need? And where is that revenue stack coming from? Is it
Mm,
all grid services? Is there some local benefit? How do we create this business case? Because
mm.
understanding that business case seems to be the unlock for how we make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess taking the market first, the market is evolving and exploding actually in some parts and changing all the time. So um, thinking just on the UK, market at the moment, you've got kind of national grid services. So we mentioned balancing mechanism right now, still the most lucrative market to be able to respond to. There are other services which vehicles could participate in, maybe in the future will participate in, depending on how fast a frequency response is required, and. So that's really interesting. Then there are local markets. So there are, distributed network operators in the UK that are transitioning to become, system operators, and very much focused on doing more with the grid that they have got locally. And so I'm gonna use that great analogy of, the national grid is the motorways, and your local sort of distribution network are your sort of local and rural roads, all the way down to your street, your house, your building. And then we've got, folks like Piclo looking at hyper localized demand and hyper localized grid restrictions and opportunities to participate, right down to like one street versus another street. So all of that's changing. We also have like wholesale market change coming, right? So Ofgem in the UK announced last week the change of code to enable non-energy retailers to participate in wholesale markets. That will come in at back end of next year, November 2024, which is going to open up the opportunity for non-energy retailers to participate in those flex opportunities around wholesale. So I guess, even as like geeky individuals that we are, you and I, Neil, we'll let Chris off being a geek, but we can see all this change happening, right? And we don't have to necessarily place big bets. Then you look all the way across to the auto manufacturers and you go, yeah, we're really good at making cars, and we already kind of put an awful lot of time and money into like electrifying those vehicles. Now we have to think about energy strategy and how we go to market in a market which is exploding and changing, and that's just the UK. So you can look at places like California, like Texas, different parts of Europe, like Australia is starting to like come up the rails as well. So I think, you know thinking about those markets and how they should play is a huge challenge for them. And then your point was like, your question was around, like what's the revenue and how does that get split? Well, yeah, ultimately the customer needs to be rewarded for engaging in those markets, and doing the thing, doing the plugging in, trusting the market, trusting the system. So that's important. And if they don't get rewarded, then why would you bother, right? Why would you even bother? I think also there's a lot of value to be extracted just through smart charging, which is orchestrated overnight charging, which you can also kind of generate revenue from, right? So you're providing a distributed battery ultimately to put energy. So then there's an argument about what will the export piece give us, and then I guess, who else should have a say in this? And you mentioned charge point manufacturers. I think that's, as those products become commoditized to a lesser or greater extent, then they will also be thinking about, they are a gateway to flexibility, right? So, if you've got a charge point which has got a super high quality meter, it could become like a sub meter point. You could be doing billing off that charge point at home or on the street, and it opens up kind of any vehicle could plug in. So I think there's lots of other kind of folk in the mix there, thinking about how do they play and how do they get involved. And then the one thing I wanted to pick up there, you mentioned around battery degradation, is the killer question that always comes up when we talk about V2G. And the really awesome news is, if you talk to manufacturers off the record, and if you talk to battery experts and chemists and kind of folk who are in that realm, what you very quickly learn is that these EVs are pretty awesome and these batteries are pretty amazing. And from a warranty perspective, the gentle discharging of energy from a vehicle on a driveway or parked somewhere, and then gently charging it back again in a kind of 12-hour-ish cycle, is absolute kind of heaven for a battery. That's just a really great way to be. And in fact, for some battery chemistries, it could even kind of ameliorate the battery's health. It could help to reduce things like dendrite growth and the kind of platelets. Whereas if you're doing a lot of rapid charging at high temperatures, that's really not fun for a battery, and that can have impacts on battery degradation and the state of health and. So I think there's a lot of education that is also needed, because, and I say this as a mechanical engineer by training, like, it's not the same as an engine, and we all have to kind of relearn everything we thought we knew about these propulsion technologies. And so when we use mileage as a proxy for how that an engine may or may not be doing, we can't do the same with a battery. We need to think about the chemistry. We need to think about how it's been charged, how frequently, how fast, and V2G certainly is at the kind of not scary at all end. And I guess the final one is around, to your point, warranty. the OEMs want to have, they want to produce great products, and they want to make sure that they are also kind of guiding how their vehicles are being used. And so even though the battery chemistry, theory and evidence is saying it's not a problem, those OEMs also need to build that into their warranties, which are already pretty amazingly impressive, right? Like 8 years and 100,000 miles is pretty standard right now for a battery without any V2G.
So that was a lot. There's a lot of information that was coming at me really fast. Um, and I guess for the average consumer, that's probably too much, right? They don't want to have to think about any of this. They just want to buy a car, right? And then if you're going to put a program together that saves me some money, great, more power to you. Um, but you mentioned in the intro about participating in some of this trial, perhaps. So what's the user experience like? I guess that's probably what most of our audience that aren't in the grid business or aren't in the EV business.
Mm.
What's the user experience?
Well, I guess, you know, underwhelming in a good way, because actually, if you're just a regular person who wants to get on with their life and use this car as a car, uh, you don't want it to interfere. You don't want to be up all night programming stuff. You don't want to have an app that you need to interact with frequently. And actually, the experience is set and forget. And actually, the most like kind of light touch, minimal interaction, the better, because it should just work in the background, because it shouldn't be something that you have to do or work on. And so actually designing these apps and experiences, and that there are quite a few then out there now for smart charging, um, which in effect is half of the bidirectional bit, right? It's the charging back. We haven't got to the kind of exporting the discharging bit yet. And it's literally what time do you need your car back, and what percentage state of charge do you want there to be in the battery? Literally two pieces of information, and it's that simple. So I mean that's the best experience for the mass market, because it's super easy. And the only time you might ever want to even then change that is if you realize that maybe you're not doing as many miles as you thought you would, and so you don't want to charge the car so much. You might for some reason want to change that start time in the morning. But I think for most people, a bit like sadly most technologies, they'll interact with it a lot in the first week or two or three or month, and then they'll be happy and it will work, and they won't open it and touch it again.
Now you also said that people needed to plug in. And it seemed to be one of the biggest hurdle that I've heard you mention multiple times in this interview is to remember to plug in. So of the 130 folks or whatever, how often did people forget when they get home to plug their car in that night?
uh, Remarkably infrequently, actually. So we were seeing like 80 to 90% compliance, um, and it was not all roses. So some of that for sure was around the charger stopped working, or the connection is not working, and last night it didn't charge up when I thought it would, and that's sort of was difficult. So it was not all plain sailing. It didn't work straight out of the box at all. But once people were becoming confident and could trust it, then they were plugging in every night, because why wouldn't you? Because you had the chance to, you know, get some money ultimately. And that's how the system worked. The export MPAN works just like an import MPAN. It gives an address for your smart meter, and it lets the system pay you as opposed to bill you. So customers were seeing actual money back into their energy accounts, as they were being paid for their export. But actually, if we take a step back, V2G, yes, it's a vehicle battery, but it's just the same concept as having a static battery installed in your home, and or having solar that exports via your smart meter. So I guess V2G is interesting and it's exciting and it's pretty sexy because it's a vehicle, but it's also a battery, and that's really cool. But actually, if you kind of boil it up, it's storage, which can store and it can export. And again, like there's folks of us that will get geeky about that, but for customers, they just need to trust that it will be a car when they need it to be a car, and that there are some other benefits they might get from that, and that needs to be super easy for them as well.
So, Claire, you mentioned briefly that you are a mechanical engineer. You've suddenly ended up running this hugely complex engineering challenge, getting consumers to plug their cars in and try and understand the energy market. How did you come about into a career like this? And why did Fiona know that your backstory was like that and picked you?
Well, Well, maybe start with that last question. So Fiona and I had worked together before. We'd worked at a company called AlertMe, which was an early Internet of Things company based in Cambridge. It went on to be bought by British Gas and is now called Hive. So some UK folks will probably have heard of Hive. We also launched products in the US with a company called Lowe's. So massive sort of stores all across the US, which used to stock the product. So we'd worked on this Internet of Things product back in like 2011, 2012, thinking about how do you interact with things like boilers in the home, things like sensors in the home, and how do you build experiences based on kind of trust and automation. So we had that experience together, and in fact we went back even further. So we both did engineering at different universities. We both won a prize from the Royal Academy of Engineering. So we'd known each other from really early days, and actually Fiona's sort of career path has been kind of more commercial and into the kind of commercial leadership, and mine is much more in the technical and the innovation and R&D side. So out of university, I went to Imperial, and then I joined a tech consultancy, and I did hands-on tech and R&D and that kind of thing. So I did a lot in medical devices, a lot of medical equipment. I lived in America, I lived across Europe, and then I left the consulting business because I didn't really fancy being a partner in a consulting firm. I wanted to carry on doing hands-on development, and I spent 9 years freelance. So I was I was here, there, and everywhere, doing lots of R&D and innovation stuff. Spent a lot of time going back towards to China. So I did a lot of projects which required sort of time in manufacturing environments in China, and working with teams, technologies, getting those to market, solving problems. And that's what I really love doing, is that interaction of kind of the people, technology, getting it to customers and making a difference with the technology. So so it wasn't too big a leap from kind of the medical stuff through to kind of the early, I would say, kind of home tech, clean tech stuff at AlertMe. And so coming finally into Octopus and working on this V2G was awesome. And then in parallel to Powerloop, the other thing I was doing through those 4 years was also director of tech and innovation. Well, the innovation bit was Powerloop. The tech bit was architecting and building out the initial systems for the EV leasing business, Octopus Electric Vehicles. So also learning about how do you design and build systems for your ops teams to actually, and sales and ops teams, to sell cars and to support them in life, but also for customers. What's the customer experience of specifying a car online and doing a kind of digital purchasing journey. It was a very busy 4 years I spent at Octopus, but it brought lots of things together that I absolutely love, and it was a wonderful experience.
So you've gone on this journey with Octopus. You're now, I believe, consulting again. You're looking to the future and helping businesses with technology that might appear in this ecosystem as we look forward. I personally have a hypothesis that future vehicle to grid will be in the world of AC. What are your thoughts on where the future of vehicle to grid goes, and what else are you looking at that could be exciting for our listeners?
So I made a decision that Octopus EV was sort of wonderfully successful, and I'm the early stage person, so pulling stuff up from the ground and kind of making it work to start with, and they're in like super growth mode, just gone through 10,000 vehicles on the road, and they need amazing scale up people. So that was what really prompted my decision to kind of take a step out. I still have a bit of an association with Octopus. You'll probably never get rid of me. But I wanted to get out there with startups and who are at that very early stage, and how do these technologies come together and are applied to different parts of the world. So I've got some interest in sort of fleet vehicles, fans, heavier stuff, maybe other technologies that are out there that are coming and going to be important. Maybe things around drones, for example, which will also form part of this future picture of electrification and transport and things like that. I'll come on to that in a sec. But in terms of the DC versus AC, which I think is a really interesting topic, I think we'll see the next few years will lean towards DC. And what DC means for a customer is that the vehicle manufacturer doesn't build their vehicle able to turn AC into DC and DC back into AC on the vehicle. You need a special charger which has got an inverter in it. It's heavy, it's expensive. It is quite expensive for the customer. So it's probably going to be, I don't know, I'm guessing, but £3,000, maybe two, three, depending on how big it gets, which is a significant outlay. It's also simpler because you have one fixed point on the grid. And so from grid permissions, you need permission to export to the grid. And so I think it's going to be an easier, like, sort of foot in the door for the manufacturers. But I think ultimately we'll see AC coming to the fore. I think there are lots of technical benefits to doing AC. I mean, not least for the customer, because you have that inverter on the vehicle. And what that means is that the vehicle itself becomes that bidirectional inverter, which means the customer needs a much simpler charger, much more in the kind of 500 to £1,000 range, which is where we see chargers right now. People say to me, "Oh no, does that mean I need a new charger?" And it's like, unfortunately, you will need a new charger. However, by the time this is coming, probably that charger on your wall is going to be ready for an upgrade, like all consumer electronics. Like that's just part and parcel of how tech moves forward. And I think that's much better for the customer. Some interesting challenges there for the grid connection, because now the vehicle itself becomes also the grid forming inverter, which for folks who are into this stuff will know, you'll then have to have maybe the inverter and maybe the vehicle around it as its enclosure tested for that grid connection. So in the UK, that's G99. In Europe, we're seeing probably moving towards harmonization of grid codes. We'll see. US, AC is quite a way off in the US. There's not yet a kind of clear pathway to like installing AC V2G. Although there's some really interesting working groups going on in California, for example, looking at AC. There's really interesting stuff coming from Charin. Now there's a working group, and also around ISO 518-20 AC kind of extension as well. So I think AC ultimately, but we've got sort of a good 5 to 10 years, I think, of working it out. And so when people say to me, "But what car should I get? Because I don't want to get the wrong car," the answer is get the car that suits you now for your mobility needs now. Don't wait and wait, because this is going to come in fits and starts, and people are going to get involved at different stages as this thing develops. So yeah, and then just a little nod to the other startups I'm sort of working with. So I guess I wanted to shout out people like Electric Green, who are working on wireless charging for fleets. So a sort of one-to-many system, which is going to be new to the world. So something different in the world of wireless. They're about to start working with Royal Mail in the UK, who have one of the sort of largest and fastest electrifying fleets in the UK. There's another company called Tual, which is spelled Tual. They're looking at putting an additional battery pack onto fleet vehicles like vans, so that you can have folk who don't need a charge point at home if they charge overnight. And a lot of folk do take vans home overnight because there isn't depot space, but we don't want those people taking time out of their working day to be charging. So there's an interesting battery swap, maybe even range extension, maybe just simplifying that whole world of take-home fleet, not requiring a kind of fixed charger. So they're two really interesting companies. There's a whole range of others like Clearwatt, who are looking at state of health, because I mean, early on, Chris mentioned, education, too much information. What do I want to know? I want to know, as a normal customer, normal buyer of a secondhand vehicle, is this battery any good? Can I trust that this car is going to do what I think it's going to do? So Clearwatt are looking at actually a really simplified state of health certificate for vehicles that won't require another device, using your smartphone data. I guess those are three really interesting ones. And then I guess off into the world of kind of new tech, there's a company called Catalysis, who are looking at cracking ammonia as an off-grid electricity generating source. So think about, very far off grid applications. Think about construction in towns and cities. That's a really interesting one that's coming. And then I guess finally Yeet, who are further and faster drones who go beyond line of sight incredibly fast. Think about maybe maintenance applications, offshore applications. There's some amazing technologies that are coming all around the world of renewables and clean tech, and that gets me so fired up. So absolutely love working on V2G, and we'll continue to work on that with lots of folk in industry, but there's lots of fun to come in other places as well.
This has been an incredible journey, diving into loads of different technologies. You've taken us on quite a journey through the UK V2G landscape and opened up at the end there about some of the incredible stuff that's coming. And maybe Chris and I should have a chat about bringing some of these guys on as hosts as guests at later stage. So super exciting. Thank you ever so much for your time, Claire. Really appreciated that.
Thanks for having me. It's been brilliant.
For our audience, we hope you've enjoyed this episode of Insider's Guide to Energy EV mini-series, a bit about going vehicle to grid. I hope you've enjoyed the content as much as we did making it. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, find us on YouTube, and we'll see you again next time on the Insider's Guide to Energy podcast. Bye-bye.